everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Rock and Roll Research Podcast, where we share the super cool past lives and side gigs of the insights professionals that help you on a day-to-day basis. My name is Matt Valley, and I'm super excited to welcome my old colleague from GFK, Audra Priluck, to the program today. Hello, Audra.
Hey Matt, great to be here.
It's great to have you. It's very great to have you. So Audra is an accomplished insights pro when it comes to media, entertainment, and all things digital. She's currently at Maru Matchbox. Is that right?
That's right, Maru Matchbox.
And we were together at GFK. And I have to say that I learned while I was at GFK that Audra can sing. And I don't just mean can sing, I mean really sing, like the biggest, most beautiful voice I've ever heard in person, I think. But it wasn't just me. So I learned along with everybody else in the company at a company offsite for GFK North America in Philadelphia. It was like, whoa, who is that singing? We had a band that was at the event, and then all of a sudden this huge voice singing New York State of Mind, I believe. But I don't want to steal your thunder because I love the way you tell that story. So
okay,
I'll let you tell that in a minute. But what's great about Audra is that when you actually start to peel the onion, you realize that there's so much behind that voice, and there are some great stories in the past. If you're a child of the 80s, you may have seen her on TV. There's a Dave Navarro connection from Red Hot Chili Peppers, all sorts of cool stuff. So I can't wait to talk about that. But first, I would love to talk to you, Audra, about your career in insights. How did you fall into this industry, and what's kind of the story from there to where you are now?
Sure. So do you want me to tell the GFK story first? we may as well. You teased it already, so right. I feel like we should cover off on that, right? But yeah, I mean, as you said, it was this offsite in Philly, and we were at the Reading terminal. I think that's how it's pronounced. And they had shut it down just for us, and it was incredible. And they had this live band playing. And they sounded great. Anyway, I walked up to the lead singer, who was also the pianist, during one of their band breaks. And I said, hey, what do you guys have coming up in your next set? It'd be really fun to sing along. And he's like, oh, well, here, take a look at what we have planned. And I was like, hey, do you guys know New York State of Mind? He goes, yeah, we do. And I'm like, great. I just happened to know the key that I was singing it in at the time because I was doing some other performances with a band. So I actually knew the key that I was singing it in. And I said, oh, great. Well, can you play it in this key? And let's start with we'll do the verse and the chorus, verse, chorus, bridge, back into the chorus. Well, he's like, yeah, totally cool. We'll just roll with it. I'm like, okay. So then I went over to the head of marketing, who had put together the whole thing, right? So, I mean, her reputation's riding on this. I totally get that, right? So I go to her and I'm like, listen, I'm going to sing with the band in the next set. Are you cool? He's like, do you sing? Yeah. No, I sing, I swear. But then she had to go to the CEO and tell him that I'm going to sing. And his response was, does she sing? And she's like, I don't know. She tells me that she sings. I'm like, and anyway, long story short, I go up there and I sing the song, and it just went so well. I mean, I'd never performed with these guys before, and I had to, kind of conduct a little bit from the mic, but it worked out great, and it was so much fun, and it is kind of like revealing, like, hey, I can do something that you guys didn't know I could do.
Yeah, just instant superstar. And the year before, I did a karaoke duet. I think it was the year before with Penny Colton, and we did "Every Rose Has Its Thorn" by Poison. It's kind of a funny thing, but of course, afterward, we're kind of like, hey, you know what? That actually sounded pretty good. Maybe people, but no.
Yeah.
And then you came along, and
that was a good time. What a neat offsite. I think the takeaway, at least for me with GFK, was how much international exposure I got. Yeah. And if I can, stick a pin in, the one big takeaway from me with working at GFK was that international exposure. There were projects that I worked on that had 40 different inputs from 40 different countries because we had boots on the ground in all of those places. And I had never experienced that before in any other part of my insights career. So that was pretty special.
Yeah, I loved that part of GFK as well. So how did you get into insights? What's the story there?
Well, I really grew up. Maybe I should even say I was born into media, and my father was spent more than 30 years at Turner Broadcasting. He spent his entire career there, and so I grew up there. Literally grew up there, and so from starting from I'm just thinking like 1980, literally. I mean, I'm trying to like recap 40 plus years of experience in this industry and different things that I got to do along the way that at the time, like looking back at the time, it was such a special environment. And I don't think even people there, I mean, I'm sure people there realized it was special at the time, but oh my God, So just Ted, being the visionary that he was, and and saying, I'm going to create CNN, and now I'm going to create a Cartoon Network, and now I'm going to create TNT, and it was just, and TCM, and buying libraries, right? And all of these things created opportunities, especially for my dad, who went from ad sales to the general manager of TBS in the late 80s to being, when he finished his career, he was the president of worldwide programming and acquisitions for all of the Turner Entertainment networks.
Wow.
So that experience, that's incredible, right? And I don't even, and I'm just trying to think, you can count maybe on one hand the people now that have that type of experience, being with one company for their entire career, doing all of these different things, right?
Yeah, so, such a rarity now.
A rarity. So as a result of being in that environment, there were things that I got to do and things that I got asked to do. And I was also a performer really early on in Atlanta. One of the things that I could mention is that the Atlanta Journal-Constitution tapped me as a musical protege in like 1981 or two. I don't even remember, but they had identified a bunch of kids in the Atlanta area who were gifted in certain areas. Right. And as a result of being tapped for that, my parents got a call from the gentleman who was the head of programming for TBS at the time. Okay. And they were interested in getting a little kids news segment started. But they didn't really know what it was going to be, and they didn't really have a kid yet to host it, and they weren't really sure. But they wanted me to come in and sit in front of a teleprompter and read. And I was 8. 8. And I think about that now because my younger son is 8.5. And I can totally see how a lot of people were like, no way. Like there's just no way it's going to work. But long and the short, that's when they decided to create Kids Beat. And from 1982 to 1987, so second grade through 7th grade, I was on TV every single day. Through TBS, we pre-taped. Basically every Monday afternoon, I was at Turner. I was in if you've ever visited the Techwood campus, everyone knows the mansion. It's that, now it's dwarfed by all the other buildings on the Techwood campus. But yeah, every Monday afternoon, I was in the mansion in Studio A, pre-taping all of the Kids Beat episodes for that week. And that is really what started my curiosity for a lot of things, right? I think at the core of Insights is curiosity. And I really thought for a time that I was going to end up being a journalist because I got to spend so much time in the CNN library finding B-roll for stories. And it was just that sense of curiosity, I think, that led me initially down this path. But basically coming out of Kids Beat, they let me write. So I started producing episodes of Kids Beat once I was no longer on the show. And then when I was that was a lot of fun, especially when they let me do theme weeks. And I was a space kid. I was totally into space camp, and I like your shirt, by the way. Let me call that out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I love it. I love it. But yeah, I went to space camp and I went to Space Academy, and I just loved that stuff. And at the same time, they let me write theme weeks for Kids Beat. So I was doing stuff on the space shuttle and doing stuff on, yeah, it was amazing. All those different missions and when they were happening. And then that led to working for the public affairs division at Turner. And that's what I got to do in high school during the summers and whatever, and help produce PSAs, help produce segments for their local public affairs show called Between the Lines. And so I got to tell kid-centric stories, but from my own teenage POV, right? And then finally college, right? So now I came out to LA, I'm at USC, I was a cinema television production major. So now this stuff's serious, right? Now I was surrounded by people that were like, I'm going to be the next Disney, I'm going to be the next, Warner Brothers, it was amazing, the people that I got to work with and learn with and become friends with at USC. And that's when I dove into TV production. I loved it. And sitcoms were my bread and butter. And so an insights thing that happened was after I graduated, the very first sitcom I worked on was the failed Andrew Dice Clay sitcom for UPN called Hits.
I loved that show.
And I can say that I knew Rosa Blasi before anybody else knew Rosa Blasi. But it was there. Oh my God, what a show. And I was an assistant to the line producer. He was the exec producer, but he was a non-creative producer. He was a line producer, and I was his assistant. Okay. And for whatever reason, I was the assistant tapped with looking at the Nielsen overnights.
Oh.
How'd we do with the overnights, right? And it would come off of a fax machine. Yes, kids, we had fax machines. But it came off of a fax machine, right? Every whatever it was Wednesday morning, the day after we aired. And it was my job to take a look and let the producers know and the writing staff which markets we were performing in and how we were trending from week to week. And it was something else.
You must have gotten good at delivering bad news.
Oh yeah, well. You know how it goes. You have to learn pretty early on how to tell somebody their baby's ugly in this business. Right. So it's just, but that really wasn't it. I think the bottom line was that we were on UPN. I don't think really the expectations were all that high, to be honest. But the bottom line is that coming out of that experience, I knew that there were other things that I could do. So working in TV production, I got to jump around a little bit, right? So when Hits got canceled, then I got to work at a talent agency, and then I got to work for John Wells Productions during a pilot season, which was kind of amazing. It was the pilot season that the West Wing script came in. So it's like there are these moments in time where you're just like, oh my God, this is going to be an amazing show. Now I didn't stay there long enough because it was a part-time gig, right? But but to know that I was there when the script came in is pretty special.
Yeah.
But there were two shows that I did get to work on that I can't wait to write about in my memoirs. So the first one is Mad About You.
Oh, you did?
I worked on the last season of that show. I was a writer's assistant, and it was incredible. I honed my typing skills like nobody's business because I was basically a court reporter, right? So I'm in the writer's room every day for hours at a time, and I'm just, furiously typing every single thing I hear, in the room. And sometimes there were, 10, 11 people in there pitching ideas, and it was incredible. And Paul and Helen were both co-executive producers that year. We had 18 writers on the staff. We had 4 writers assistants. The other 3 writers assistants all went on to become executive producers of their own right.
Wow!
And so it's incredible following their careers, and I just love that. And again, the curiosity, the asking questions, and I had no desire to be a writer, which actually was an advantage for me because I was the only one not kissing people's asses during that entire year, right? Whereas the other 3 writers' assistants were like, oh my God, we got to be baby writers, we got to get an agent, we got to get represented, and all that stuff. And that was zero pressure for me in that way. And coming out of that final season, I got to jump over to the King of Queens. And I was on that show for its 2nd season. And in that show, I was the assistant to one of the executive producers who was, again, not a creative producer. He was actually the manager for Kevin James and Joe Rogan and Gary Valentine and these really incredibly talented comedian actors, right? And even though I was part of the staff, the show staff, really my responsibility was to help with the personal representation and help them book gigs and book weekends of shows. And so it was wild that experience being on that side of the production. Yeah. And so, those 2 shows definitely stand out. And there are others that, other shows that I worked on that were also interesting, but no need to mention them here. I will mention the last show I worked on, which was really cool. And it was Arliss with Robert Wool.
Oh, okay.
HBO. And so that was in 2001. Mm-hmm. And the reason I want to mention that is because at that point, I was ready for a 401k and some medical benefits.
I know the feeling.
And it was time for me to find a salary gig. Working in TV production was a great way to spend my 20s. But it was time. And I was given an opportunity that summer to interview for the research department coordinator / junior analyst position at 20th Television. May it rest in peace. And that is what officially got me into Insights full time. So I was taking Nielsen ratings and writing sales pitches for Buffy and Cops and Malcolm in the Middle and what else? Texas Justice, if anybody remembers that daytime court show.
Yep.
But I was writing, obviously, using Nielsen ratings to tell a story, and that was awesome. Loved it. Now here's the other thing that happened. I'm writing these pitches, these decks, mm-hmm. and I'm passing them off to the salesperson who then goes and takes the meetings and, potentially closes the business. Well, I'm hearing about all the fun they're having. And I'm like, well, I want to do that. I want to do what they're doing. And that is when I really fought hard to go into sales. And really just dive right into business development. And that's when the head of sales there and the West Coast head of sales gave me some phoner markets to start calling on, like Jonesboro, Arkansas, and some other places that they weren't going to be traveling to. And I was able to sell in. And again, via fax machine, you got to get that signed contract via fax.
Old school.
Oh yeah, totally old school.
I remember waiting for faxes to come in. Yeah.
That was my first signed deal was from the ABC affiliate in Jonesboro, Arkansas, where I was able to sell in the practice on Sunday nights after their local news, and it was a straight barter deal for 2 years. But let me tell you, I paraded that piece of paper around. I paraded that thing around like it was the second coming, and realized that I got bit by the bug, at that point, and knew that this was definitely the thing for me. And I spent a great amount of time doing that at Fox, and then jumping over to Warner Brothers and doing it for them on the West Coast as an account executive. Mm-hmm. And then it was after Warner Brothers that I officially jumped to the vendor side, and the rest is history. So I haven't. So I've been doing primary research and understanding those attitudes and perceptions that people have toward content, toward the platform, toward a service, toward a network. And it always comes back to my curiosity again, right? Understanding, why do you care? Why is this important? But then also, I'm obsessed with the life cycle of a piece of content, which has also changed so much in the past 20 years, right?
Absolutely.
And it's incredible. So that has really guided, that's been my North Star, right? Is the content and the life cycle that it has, and how a show like MASH and continue to live on as an evergreen, or a show like Seinfeld, which is in like its 6th cycle or something crazy, like, or 10th cycle. I don't even know anymore. But it's amazing how some of these shows continue to live on.
Yeah, and that's a great segue to your Audra Lee character on Kids Beat, because that had come back around not too long ago. Is that right? Great story there. So
oh my God, yeah, so funny. I knew that Kids Beat was nationally televised. So even as a little girl, I knew that TBS was broadcast, all over the U.S. The reason I knew that was because I had family that lived in Houston. And so when I would travel to Houston and I would go places like Astro World or or an Astros game or whatever with family, or people would ask me, "Oh, are you Audra Lee from Kids Beat?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I am." And they're like, "Wow, can I have your autograph?" Right? So I'm 9, 10, 11 years old, right? It was bizarre, but I got it. I understood, right? And then in Atlanta, I don't even know how to classify myself, kind of like a local celebrity type. It's like I got to, be in parades, and I got to, wave to people and, have a sign on the side of a truck or something, so I got to do all that kind of stuff, which was pretty fun. And then fast forward to, I guess it was, I went back and looked at my email in advance of this because I knew we were going to be talking about it.
Right.
But it was late 2017. Okay, so it's been a minute,
What is that? They're 40 years? 40?
What? Yeah, right.
30 years.
And I check a message. I go to my Audra Lee fan page because I've done a whole bunch of music stuff in the meantime. But I go to my Audra Lee fan page really just for shits and giggles. And I see that there's a message in there from Dave Navarro. Now I'm like, what? Dave Navarro? Like, what is this? And he basically says, "If this is Audra Lee from Kids Beat, I'm a huge fan and I really want you to be on my podcast." I'm like, what? Okay. So, of course, I write him back, and I don't even know how long that message had been sitting there, quite frankly. I can't remember. But he wrote me back within 30 seconds of me sending him a note. I was like, "Here's my personal email. Feel free to reach out. Happy to schedule something." He didn't know where I lived, right? He was like, "I'd love for you to be on the podcast." He thought I'd be calling in. He did he had been doing the Dark Matter podcast live in LA. He didn't know I lived here. He didn't know I lived in LA. So when I got in touch with him, like through personal email, and he was like, "Well, I got to have you on." I'm like, "Well, I'm in LA." And he goes, "Oh," it's like, it was just crazy for all this to happen. And then he put me in touch with his producer, and the rest is history there. But being on his podcast was a riot. And my husband came with me, and a mutual friend of ours tagged along. And it was just a riot because he wanted to hear all about Kids Beat. Every single story I could come up with, everything I could remember. I came in with pages of notes and things to share. And we had a really good time, reminiscing and talking about it. And it just goes to show that I think there's so many people who remember watching the Brady Bunch and the Three Stooges on TBS in the 1980s, either in the morning before they went to school, or if, we were all latchkey kids, right? I mean, we would all come home, and we'd all come home in the afternoon and turn it on and watch that show. So I'm very well aware of how many people, let's say aged, 45 to 55 or 45 to 60, who may have watched every day. And it's wild. It is wild.
Yeah, nostalgia is a powerful thing for sure. So I just love that story, and it's just perfect for the Rock and Roll Research Podcast, of course, because Dave Navarro, for those that don't know, he played in the Red Hot Chili Peppers and then became just kind of an uber celebrity in its own right. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And never in a million years did I ever think I would be, on a podcast with him, taking pictures with him, that he would be like, I really need to know you.
Okay, now,
so
you've alluded to some of this, but having grown up in that media space and then finding your way into insights and sales, are there any lessons that you draw from your childhood on Kids Beat and having media around you that you use in your day-to-day?
Absolutely. I think listening is key. That's really just such a cornerstone. Like when you think about making music, especially, I spent how many years singing in chorus and doing show choir and even marching band, things that are, you have to listen to the other people. Like if you can't hear, right? So figuratively, right? If you can't hear the people around you that are singing, you're too loud. Yeah. And I think that is something that's so important to apply to every conversation that I have with insights professionals. Is how are you listening to your consumers, your viewers, your subscribers? Again, I said this before, but it's so true. It's like, why do they care? What's motivating them? How are they evangelizing you? What can you learn from that? So that's definitely a huge lesson that I learned early on, that you can't just be a bull in a china shop and assume everyone's just going to go right along with whatever you're saying. That listening is such a huge component.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But there still are quite a few bulls running around in china shops to this day. So it's great to hear. So thinking then about the future of insights, you've kind of chosen this as your career, and I'm sure you've thought a little bit about what it's got in store for us. Any thoughts there?
Coming into this, I was like, oh, insights are simple, insights are easy, and it's gotten a lot more complicated. Let's face it. But I still think that insights, and I'm looking at it through the lens of primary research, right? So it's the survey driven, not the measurement driven, because I think that's a whole nother Oprah. I think just talking about measurement, right? But if we talk about primary research specifically, I think it's, they are going to continue to be that mix of method and a little magic. I think there's a little bit of both when it comes to insights these days.
Right.
And we have to meet consumers where they are, and pose questions that are interesting for them to answer. I'm so frustrated by surveys that are more than 15 minutes long.
Yeah.
It's just not necessary anymore. And driving that home to teams of people and sometimes executives that have been in their roles for too long, it's so hard to drive the point home. And again, it's about listening. What do these people want? Well, they don't want a 20-minute survey. That's what they don't want. I can tell you that. And Maru as a company, we have worked to close that say-do gap for so long, and it's right. and it's easy. This is easy about insights. It's easy to ask about how people are thinking. What are you thinking about? Or it's easy to ask them, how are you behaving? What did you do today? But it's much harder to ask, how are you feeling?
Right.
And that's why we've incorporated System 1 techniques, right? Getting that gut reaction to something, that subconscious, see an image, click on agree, disagree right away, or drag and drop, or make a collage, do something with visual semiotics that allows us to use pictures to describe how we feel about it. What's that emotional connection that we have with something? Because it's so hard for us to describe verbally how we feel about it, right? Because I don't know about you, but when I go to a restaurant, one of these days I'll go to a restaurant again, by the way.
It'll be nice.
right? Pre-COVID, you go to a restaurant, you receive that entree or whatever it is, you take a picture of it and post it. You don't say, oh, I'm at this restaurant, I'm eating this really delicious meal. Right. You're posting a picture. It's so natural for us now to speak in that way and describe how we feel in that way. And so that's I think media companies specifically need to spend more time thinking about how their viewers and their subscribers are feeling.
Yeah, I really like that example too, because you mentioned meeting respondents or consumers where they are, and that's a great example of it, right?
Oh, for sure.
You don't have to ask anything when you know what they're posting. You can really get a sense for what matters and how they're feeling in that moment. So I think that's a great example.
Absolutely. And one other thing that I want to mention is specifically about COVID, right? So it matters that COVID has accelerated the pace of change.
Right.
Especially when it comes to adoption of streaming services and AVOD, and so another point, just like the future of insights. I think 5 years ago, you could do a segmentation study, a traditional behavioral attitudinal segmentation, maybe 5 years ago, and it could live on for like 2 years.
Yep.
I would say that's pretty legit, right? And if you did a segmentation last year, you may as well rip it up and throw it out. And especially if you did something last fall or in the winter and had the insights delivered in January, February, it's old news, really old news, right? Like it has just accelerated the pace of change so much. Like you just have to, constantly be willing to shift and move and think differently if you're a media brand.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's great stuff for people to be thinking about right now. So I appreciate that. So this has been a great conversation, Audra. I really appreciate it. If you've seen one of these podcasts already, which you might have, you know what I like to ask last. And being that you're still a performing artist under the name Audra Lee, I believe.
Yep, Audra Lee. You can look me up on iTunes. My album from 2012, that was #1 on my bucket list for a long time, but I finally self-produced an album and it's there, Audra Lee.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe I'll put a link there on the YouTube as well so people can see
awesome.
that. So they can find it. Well, so you're stranded on a desert island. Besides Slayer, what are the 3 albums that you would want with you for the end of time?
Yeah, with me for the end of time. I'm not
biased.
So, well, we're going to start with one of the very first albums that I had on CD. Let's not talk about vinyl for a second because that's a whole nother Megillah. But we'll talk about one of my very first CDs, which was the Huey Lewis and the News album 4.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it is such a good one. And I think the reason is because of my love of acapella, and they've got that song Naturally on that album, as well as some other, great hits, So I think some people would say, well, what about Sports? How do you forget that album? It went double, triple platinum or whatever, and it's a great album. But for me, it's that acapella song that does it for me and so fun to harmonize with. And anyway, so that's #1.
Cool.
Right. Number two is going to be Sting, and it's the album Symphonicities. So I love so many of his albums from the 90s, and I was looking back at what they were titled and where the songs were. But Symphonicities, what he did was re-recorded so many of his hit songs, but with a full symphony orchestra, and it just the depth. Of the instrumentation that happened as a result of that, it has made it one of my favorite albums. So it's like songs but in a slightly different way than how you originally heard the radio edit.
Right. Interesting. And always with world-class musicians. Okay.
Oh yeah. I mean, he's incredible, and I've seen him in concert a couple times too. And last but not least, and they would be #1, but I wanted to mention Huey Lewis first. But my all-time favorite band in the world are the Indigo Girls. And I know that they have come up before in this podcast. And as a girl who grew up, born and raised in Atlanta, that's where they're from. And I have been to more than 20 concerts And they're just incredible musicians and writers and performers. And the two albums in particular, this is where I literally cannot pick between babies. Like, it's literally impossible. But there are two albums that are tied for #1 in my book. The first is called Rites of Passage. And then the second one is Swampophilia. And those are two, they were just transformative albums for me that came out when I was in high school and I think on my way to college, or my freshman year of college is when the second one came out. I think one came out in 92 and the other came out in 94. So it's like, but yeah, just so incredible and really such an influence in my own original music and songwriting as well. And there's no question that one of my original songs that I wrote absolutely had Indigo Girls written all over it.
Cool. Well, it's a great choice. I can tell you that I will stop by your island, pay you a visit, listen to a couple records. It's all right. So very good stuff. I like the Indigo Girls as well. And this conversation has brought me closer to Fine, if I may.
Absolutely.
Sorry, terrible. All right. So thanks so much, Audra. This has been a really great conversation. Lots of great thoughts about market research, where it's headed, and such cool stories. So I hope people check out Kids Beat, and especially your new stuff, which is really, really good stuff. So,
thank you for inviting me to this. It was so much fun to reminisce and talk through some really cool stuff.
Yeah, always a pleasure. So rock and roll, Audra, and I'm sure we'll be talking soon. Take care. Bye.